Take it away, Shelley.
Okay, we are going to talk about different ways of protecting shoreline. We're doing this because of water quality issues, habitat for pollinators, for aquatic animals, and also for loss of real estate, because with these huge rains we've been having, and we'll talk about that a little bit in here, people are losing feet of shore. And we're going to talk about methods to not only stop the erosion, but gain some back. So we're talking about native vegetation and soft armor. We're not talking, well, we will talk about rocks, but I'll show you some of the issues with using rock rather than using soft armor. And here we're talking about protecting water and why. Okay, some people fish, some people ski, there's wildlife viewing, protecting our drinking water, preserving plant and animal, all of these things. And I think you're here so you care about any number of these things. 90%, whoop, go back.
All right, hang on. Yeah, I gotta go back one.
Oops, you're going forward.
Oh, hang on.
Going forward still.
Christy, are you on your computer?
Yeah.
Just press the back arrow on your keyboard.
Oh, okay. All right. Hang on. Let's see. Where is it? The back. Okay.
That's it.
Interesting.
There we go. Thank you, Caitlin.
90% of all lake life is born and raised in that area right where the land and the water meet. That's the super important area, and that's where we're having most of our struggles with the high water events, bigger boats, all of that. So these slides show, the one on the left is a natural shoreline, and if you look at the bottom of the picture, there's little arrows that show you the runoff volume phosphorus. There's a certain amount of that happening, but it's very well protected by trees, tree roots, plants, emergent plants. The middle one is the typical 1930s cabin. You can see there's a tiny bit of lawn. Otherwise, it's a natural site. It's still got its emergent vegetation. If you hit the forward arrow one time, there you go. So now the runoff and the phosphorus are not very great, but sediment is happening there. Just simply opening up that little bit. Lawn grass is not able to hold the soil in place where there's water, where it interfaces the water. So we're adding sediment. And then another click forward. This is what happens on this site underneath there. That site is almost 100% impervious. So even though there's a little bit of grass, grass becomes an impervious surface when it gets walked over and compacted. So you've got roof, you've got driveway, you've got rock, you've got the lawn, you've got zero vegetation at the shore. So you're having lots and lots of runoff, tons of phosphorus going into and sediment. We have a lot of natural phosphorus in our soil in Minnesota. And so you don't even have to use lawn fertilizer. Any soil that's getting washed away from your shore is adding phosphorus to the water. So we're going to talk a little bit about the large rain events that have been happening. And I'm sure everyone's aware of all of this. So we're having bigger rains, we're having stronger storms, we're having more frequent rains, mega rain events, the water quality impacts are huge of this. And we're losing habitat, shoreline soils. And what I'd like to do is mention to people, okay, if you have 100 feet of shore and you lose a foot of soil along that 100-foot shore, and some people have lost 5. So you have 100 square feet. What is a square foot of real estate worth on a lake shore? It's pretty valuable property. So beyond the environmental impact, we've got a huge economic impact of losing that soil. In 2015, we had very little snow cover on the lakes, and we had a huge ice push in the spring. And the picture below is one site that had a lot of damage to it. And the little chart on the bottom, and you can see on that picture, there's nothing to hold that soil there. Lawn grass has tiny, little, very, very shallow roots. It just simply can't hold that together. It pushed up a lot of shoreline. We'll have some pictures later. And the chart below is my lake, where we have a cabin. This is Portage Crooked Lake. And look at those, there's the average line, and look at those rain events. And they just keep happening and keep happening. And here is a picture from Big Sandy Lake after the Duluth flood. The Duluth storm of 15 some inches of rain went across Big Sandy before it hit Duluth. And the lake went 6.5 feet up, and it stayed up for 6 weeks. You see the water line on the tree? If you
Oh,
look,
yeah.
look to the left, there's a water line on those trees where that water stood. Everything was dead in places that had non-native vegetation. Shrubs were dead. Big trees were dead. Nothing was there. And there was a lot of black muck. So I got calls to go up and say, what can we do? The top left picture was a site I went to just before the snow went out the next spring. And you can see how far up that water went and how much of their lawn was just simply dead. Shrubs were gone. A huge tree was gone. There were damaged sites all around the lake. But if you look at the top left picture and you see that red roof up in the corner, when the snow went away and I came back to do the design for this project, um, I stepped next door, and the picture in the middle there, that's how hers looked. So she had native vegetation. It had always been native. She'd never touched it. These are the plants that are there. They're all around Big Sandy Lake, and her site was perfect. So if you compare the top left picture with the center picture, and they're side by side, it was a really amazing contrast. So it shows you that there are plants that can even withstand the Duluth flood. 6.5, being under 6 feet of water,
Wow.
6.5 feet of water for week, and come up with just hold the soil perfectly. So when you remove native vegetation, then we get a lot of soil loss, but we also get invasive plants. This is reed canary grass. It gets 5 feet tall. It becomes a monoculture. It has a massive root system, but it's a thin root system. It only gets about this thick. And then it chokes out all of the other things that grow, deep-rooted things that would be there or were there. So it becomes this mat of vegetation kind of floating on the water, and then you can stick your arm all the way back underneath there, and eventually it just collapses. Muskrats love to go in there. It's a great place for muskrats to go in and burrow, so they do more damage. This is what it looks like, and anybody with a shoreline should watch for this plant. You should learn about reed canary grass. You should find out how to identify it and watch for it and how to remove it, because it will colonize and it can displace the good vegetation that you have. So there's that mat. You can just see the mat of roots there, and you can't quite see underneath, but you can stick your arm right underneath there all the way back. Here's a chart, a poster that the Minnesota DNR put together, and showing the root systems of native plants. And if you look at the bottom where it says improve water quality, down just below that, it's 15 feet. I can't see the right pictures there, but that's 15 feet down. So our prairie plants have roots. Some of the plants can go 15 feet down. The wet meadow plants can go 5 to 7, some of them, right down into the lake bottom. So they're holding soil. If you look at the top left, that teeny tiny little thing up there, that is lawn grass. There is no way lawn grass can hold soil together when there's water. So we're going to talk about different ways to protect and armor and establish plant material. If you have non-natives you have to get rid of, or if you've had lawn grass right down to the water. So this is a project we did on Mille Lacs Lake where they have massive waves coming across. We needed to protect it to establish some native plants. We used what's called willow wattle or brush bundles, and you can see that staked out in the water. We just did that. It's very, very shallow there, just a couple inches of water, and we were protecting that site so that we could establish emergent vegetation there and to protect the shore above. And it looks like we mulched that site. When we got there for planting day, there was a 5-foot heap of debris that had washed up on that shore from the lake, which was burying a lot of other plant material. So we actually just spread it out and used it as mulch and planted right into it. And it turned out fine. Once we got this vegetation established on here, it did help to deflect some of that debris from landing up on their beach. This is how you make willow bundles. It's pretty darn easy. You find, you can use willow. We use willow because it's very narrow sticks. If you look at that, you can see the butt ends in there are very narrow. They're very long. They have a lot of small branches, so you can make very dense bundles. But if you don't have willow, you can use maple saplings. You can use other brush. As long as you can tie it into a tight bundle to kind of deflect the waves and yet let the water come in and still go out, it'll help to protect the shore. Okay. So here's a site we looked at before. Next picture. Here it is after we got rid of the reed canary, and you can see that the willow bundles are right smack against the edge of the soil, protecting it and holding the fines. We use this instead of a biolog. Sometimes you see biologs on projects. I like willow wattle because it's free. You can do it without a permit because it's natural material. You do need a permit anytime you plant plants into the water. At the water's edge, anything from there below, you do need to get a DNR permit. They just want to check your list to make sure there's no invasives there. But the willow itself does not need a permit. Willow's everywhere. You can find willow just about anywhere. You can replace these. You can add more bundles in the future if you want to. It allows water to come in and go out so it doesn't get bounced around so much. And the plants grow right through it, debris piles on it, and it becomes soil. So you actually gain, when we did this project, in the next picture, you'll see we gained a foot of soil just from simply doing that. For the plants, and the plants have water and nutrients, so they grow like crazy. This is 1 year later. And this is the kind of plant growth you get right at the water's edge. Now, these people did the willow again. So let's go to the next picture. I think I have. Yep, so they did a bundle of willow. They allowed their plants to grow in. They divided the ones they had. They moved them out over the first bundle of willow, which almost becomes soil. They did it 3 times. They've gained 5 feet of new soil back on a shore where they had lost a lot of soil. And you can see the resilience here. These plants are so deep-rooted, you can see they're deflecting the waves really well. Here's another project. This is a very peaty lake, so they were having hunks of peat wash off the soil by about the size of a bathtub, and so you can see how raw that edge is there. We used willow again. We planted it, and that was, I think, in June. Okay, and this is a year later. The edge is stable. The plants are growing. They've got habitat. They had butterflies like crazy. The soft armor works. Here's another site where all of the trees and shrubs, and you can see that it was pushed up somewhat by ice because it bulges up before it slopes down, and it's just being beaten up by the waves. There's nothing there to hold soil in place. You can, this one was undercut more than 3 feet underneath this bank. On this site, we got a special permit from the DNR. We were able to restructure the soil. So we didn't push anything toward the water, but we grabbed that lump and pulled it back, recreated a new slope so that now the waves and ice can ride up and down that slope rather than shoving against it. When you get a slope like this and the waves come up and bash against it and the ice comes and pushes it, at some point wants to collapse into the water. So we pulled the soil back. We used erosion blanket. You see there's 2 different kinds there. The one at the top, the white blanket, is Curlex. It's made of aspen, a waste aspen fiber. That goes all the way down to the water. And the other one is a more sturdy blanket that goes over the top of that to hold it in place. You can walk on it, you can drag equipment over it, and it will help hold the soil, the fines of the soil in place until the plants grow. So you can also see that we've got a biolog on this one right down at the water's edge because it was loose soil. Because we had moved soil around and it was loose, we used a biolog at the bottom instead of willow. And then we had a planting workshop and we planted the heck out of it. This is the next spring, early spring. So we planted it midsummer, and this is how much it had grown by the next year. Now these plants are plants, you can see how fast they're growing. They can be divided, they can be moved around. If you have a little bit of a hole where something doesn't come up, you can use your own plants to rip apart and plunk back in. So let's talk a little bit about rock. Lots of people have rock, have done rock, have old rock, and let's kind of talk about the issues that happen when you have rock. This is what happens eventually. This was in 2014, so this was not a particularly bad year for ice push this spring. I got a call from this person, and you can see that soil is actually pushed up onto the siding of their cabin. It pushed up in the air, and this had been happening for years and years and years. When I went to visit here, the 97-year-old father was there who grew up using this cabin. He said when he was a kid, he used to play out 35 feet out in the yard between the cabin and the lake. So they have lost 35 feet of soil over the years. And he said that when they first put riprap, when they had lost soil, they used 12-inch rock. And then in the 80s, they used 24-inch rock, and all of that rock is in that bank, and that bank is straight up in the air. The rock went back 10 feet in that bank where it had been pushed by ice. Oh, and also the cabin next door was pushed off its foundation by this. Okay. This is the same site. This is what it looked like in profile. Look at the rocks that are shoved in there. There was landscape fabric, but this is what happens eventually. People do rock and it stays for a while, but at some point this will happen with rock because you get a high water event and then the ice comes in or you get a massive storm. So they used small rock to begin with. They didn't do it. They used a bigger rock. It just keeps getting shoved in there. The soil has collapsed into the lake. There's no filtering at all happening here. There's no habitat here. The DNR has found that rocks heating up, they cause algae bloom in the water adjacent to the rocks. And people tend to like to keep the rocks clean because they get weeds in them. And so now we have chemical use by the water to keep the rocks clean. That's not good. So 30 feet of the soil and nutrient in this yard had gone into the lake. So you can imagine the impact on the water quality. So in this case, we got permission to pull that lakeward. There was nowhere to go back. So all of that rock there was there. All of that rock was already on site. We brought no rock in at all. We ripped it out of the banks, pulled it down, and you can see that it's set as flat as it can go. There was so much. We would have gotten it down in the water farther, but there was so much that he's standing on rock that goes another 5 feet out, and there's that much rock left sticking up. But you want to get the rocks at not like this, where the ice can grab it and push. You want them as flat as you can get them because then the ice has a chance to ride up and down the bank, which it needs to do. It's going to go somewhere, so it has to have a place to go. The same thing happened here where they set a silt fence, they pulled the rock out, they put blankets in, flipped the blankets back over the restructured soil, and then we can go to the next picture. And we planted it again right up to the cabin. Now this was in the fall of 2014 that we did this project. And then the next winter, 2015, I was hearing stories from all around the state about ice push. And that was a terrible, terrible year. Some of you will remember. It pushed soil, I think there were 15-foot ice sand pushes up on the north end of Mille Lacs Lake. It pushed them straight up in the air and then they collapsed down in. There were places that had 5 feet of soil push up in the air and then collapse down. So I was a little concerned about this site because we had just done it in the fall and the plants had not had a chance to get their roots very deeply in the soil. Next picture. So I went up there. I went up in January and February and March as I'm hearing all these horror stories, watching this site. And you can't see the rocks and you can't see that slope, but you can see that the ice is ridden up without pushing. It's riding right up onto the site. And then in the spring, it melted back down again. And then next picture. This is the next spring. So you can see a few rocks there that we had to shove. We just kicked them back down in the water. The plants were there. This is the next summer. It's still stable and it has held. Here's another site with rock. Same darn issue. This is 2015. This is what we were seeing all around the state. People who had rocks mostly, or just pure sand. When you have a beach, it gets pushed around like this too. So you can see where the rocks went. The rocks used to be at 45 degrees. You can see they're now all shoved all the way back into that bank. Most people don't have a swing like that that's buried 3 feet in the ground. So you can see how high it pushed up and then it drops off back behind. And it was collapsing. The bank was collapsing into the lake. So there were a lot of urgent issues that's in 2015 in the spring. And in fact, the DNR waived the rules for moving soil around because it had to get fixed. Here's another site that pushed that same spring, shoved, and it had a planting. You can see that it had a planting, but it had a massive rock structure down below, pushed up above. We pushed it all back down, and the little blue and things like that held up at the top, they did hold really well, but they lost the vegetation down below. And here's another one. This is Mille Lacs, and that's a tough one. That is a really tough one. But you can see how far back the rocks are in that bank. They used to be weighed out, and they keep dumping more, and it keeps going up higher and higher in the air. So here's the process of reclaiming after 2015. There's the silt fence that we put in. This is the site with the swing there, okay? So they set the fence, the left picture, you can see there's a silt fence to catch the soil. They pulled all of the rock out. They were able to push the soil out to that rock, but to give it a good slope. Now we have a slope there that the waves can come up on and go down, the ice can go up and come down. And I do have another picture I didn't include here, but I have a picture taken straight down in the water behind that silt fence, and the water was just as clean as could be. They did a really, really good job of protecting the lake from moving the soil. Okay. And then we planted it. We planted and planted and planted and planted. This is 1 year later on that site. That's amazing. But when you restructure the soil, it does make things grow faster. So I will say that if you have a hard bank that's been an ice ridge for 1,000 years and ice has been banging against it, it does take plants longer. When we can restructure like this, it just goes crazy. So this is an extraordinary amount of growth, but that's 1 year, and it's high diversity, it's stable. We've had high water events since, and I've gone back to this site and it's been fine. Here's another one where it's not rock that did the damage, but the removal of all of the shrubs and trees on a sandy bank that was very, very steep. And over high water events and big storms, there's just nothing to hold it there. So again, the soil was pulled down. It was wrapped in that blanket. There's a biolog at the very, very bottom there above the rocks. Same process, planted the heck out of it again. Same blanket that we had used in the other one. And this is 1.5 years later. So it's stable. There's shrubs coming up in there. There's red osier dogwood in there that's going to fill in and hold that stuff together. And now it's stable. Here's another site where there was so much erosion. The water running over the slope from up behind that cabin had scoured every speck of vegetation off the shore. And there are rocks at the bottom. They were pushed some, but it was stable. So what we needed to do was slow the water down. So in this case, to prevent that runoff from running down the hill, you can see that we did what's called slope checks. And Crowing Soil and Water has an awesome video online. If you go to YouTube and you look for Crowing Soil and Water slope checks, they show you exactly how to do this. It's a burlap kind of a fabric that you get from Brock White, which is in Baxter. They carry erosion supplies there, and you lay it down. You pour a good either clean sand if you're down by the water, or a good composted material, clean compost. You don't want black dirt because you can get reed canary and things like that from that, and weeds. So a composted material, you roll it up, you make a kind of a biolog, but it has soil inside. So it's a really easy thing for plants to grow into. We staked one right at the top to slow down all that gushing water coming over the hill there, and then did a series of slope checks going down to slow the water down, to capture, infiltrate, and then to revegetate. So this is my planting crew here. We all got busy. And these slope checks also give you a place to stand when you're on a steep slope. And I think you'll see that on Val's too. It's really difficult to work on a loose slope and try to get it planted. Okay. This is what it looked like the next spring, early spring. So you can see the plants that are coming up. We planted right into those wraps. That soil wrap you can plant right into, and the plant roots will grow through that, anchor it, stabilize. And you can see that it's terraced. So the water is going to catch on those terraces and infiltrate before it runs all the way down into the lake. And I've been back since then, and this site is doing really well. Here's one that, another site that was pushed up. You can see the same darn thing with the rocks, shoved up in the air. It was actually, it lifted their deck up in the air. And next picture. We used soil wraps here. So similar to that other one, we used clean fill sand on the bottom in this one. And we got permission from the DNR to go out the distance we would have gone out with rock, the 6 feet that they do allow with riprap. And they allowed us to go that far out to recreate a slope, because that other one was just there for ice to push on. So now here again, we've got a place for ice to ride up and down. The bottom is a log. The second one up is another product called BioBlock. That's a Curlex product. Okay. Here's next spring. Again, early spring. And it's just done really well. So now there's vegetation there. There's roots to anchor, to hold soil, to offer habitat. There's diversity. It's keeping the water clean. And this place is gorgeous. Once the flowers started to bloom, it is really beautiful. So this is the difference between rock and soft armor. This shows you what native plant materials can do to protect the soil, to protect your shore. It offered a few examples of different kinds of techniques you can use to do it. If you just have a small bit of erosion at the water's edge, you can use willow, and you can get the right plants in there. You'll have a stable shore.
Does anyone have any questions for Shelley?